Intro. Oh, wow. It's my first time on the podcast.
That's right. Welcome to... I don't know what number episode this is anymore. I'm here with the other Emily.
This is the other Emily. And the cat who is currently covering my notes with her butt.
These things do happen.
These things do happen. See, until you stop at these things happening, this thing does not happen. Yeah, got a little opera on us there.
I say that all the time.
I do too. It's a echo, there's a name for it where if like one person either starts a noise or like says a line that connects to something and the other person like just picks it up and goes, there's a name for it. It starts with echo.
Oh, I don't know. That's just something I say frequently. It's a very applicable phrase.
It is. I also say according to plan.
Mm.
Yes. Every last little thing, every teeny tiny microscopic little thing must go.
According to plan.
Our son will be wed.
I also think of that song a lot whenever someone says something like, "It's a wonderful day."
It's a beautiful day for a wedding.
Yeah, that's immediately where my brain goes.
Yeah. The amount of song lyrics that live unfiltered and rent-free in my head constantly that would be triggered at a moment's notice is a lot. It's a vast library up there.
So you prepared something for today?
I did, in fact, prepare something for today. The challenge was, must be before the year 2000, and I went, oh, I definitely have something for that.
Yeah. We haven't, I guess, officially stated the rules, but we've been reading books, right? Mm-hmm. And reading poems. None of them have been newer than, like, the past 100 years.
I am going to continue, depending on the source and which one is true. I may or may not break that today.
It kind of doesn't matter. We've mostly been reading public domain stuff up to this point. But the novel that Emily and I are reading now is from the 80s.
1980s or 1880s?
1980s.
Okay.
So that is going to break the pattern, but I was sitting here and I thought, well, vintage is 20 years and older, right?
Vintage, I think, might be 30, and it's hard to say because there's, oh my gosh, there's one that's retro. Retro, I think, is like 10 to 20, and then vintage is anything that's like more than 30.
1980s was still more than that ago.
Unfortunately, wasn't the 90s like 10 years ago?
But what I was getting at is our channel would still focus on vintage and older.
Yes, this is by sure at least vintage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was thinking, even if a book from the 1980s is the newest thing that we've read so far, it's still going on 40 years old. So that's why when you asked if there were any criteria, obviously public domain is no longer a rule, but it does have to be older than the year 2000. Okay.
And now at least I'm sitting here going, oh no, is this public domain? But presumably, I would think by now this is probably...
Well, when was it written?
Okay. Some sources say originally published in 1892, and a different source says that it was published in 1929. So, I mean, still, we're going on 100 years old by about 5 years.
That's a pretty big difference.
It's a very big difference.
And
especially because then as I was further doing my research, the number of things that it could be about was also very large, which was interesting because one was an event that took place in 1916, which would then negate the ability for it to have been published originally in 1892. But if it's possible that it was published again in a different poetry collection in 1929, people could be attributing it to the event that happened in 1916.
That's true.
The sources may not all be wrong, but the source that did attribute it to the 1916 event was talking about it and mentioning lines that literally aren't in the poem. So, I also don't know how much I trust that source.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was very interesting.
So what is the poem?
The poem is The Rose of Battle by W.B. Yeats or William Butler Yeats. Is it Yeats or Yeats?
I don't know. I've never heard of this before.
I'm surprised, okay. But then again, I was reading... To preface the reason that I thought of this poem immediately is because I was huge into the Gemma Doyle trilogy. It's the one where it's like the 16-year-old with the magic vision powers at the Victorian boarding school. Her mother was one of the other magic, vision girls. that went back and back and back, and she ended up at the same boarding school her mother did, and kind of unlocking the secrets of what had happened. It was like a YA trilogy, and the first one was, I forget actually what the first one's called right now, but the second one's called Rebel Angels, and the third one is called The Sweet Far Thing. And it actually gets its title from this poem. And during like the final presentation of the young ladies to show how, so sophisticated and how well we've taught them, they kind of put on a series of like talent show, like plays and poetry readings to show the families that they are graceful and demure and very respectful and very cutesy, whatever. So they sing, they dance, they recite poetry. Gemma decides that the poem that she is given is not really interesting to her, so she finds The Rose of Battle. And decade and a half to 2 decades later, I mean, it had to have been a decade and a half, that I read this book, I still remembered and still had memorized the section of the poem that she reads in the book. That's how much of an impact that this poem made on me.
I've never read this book, so this is all new.
I'll have to let you borrow it because it's actually, it's magic, and it's not really special girl is special because special. There is the bloodline thing, but the other girls can also become part of the circle, and she is mad at the concept of why are we excluding people because they don't have the magic, and she wants to bring them in, and she wants to push away the head priestesses who are well, they don't have the magic so they can't be part of it, and she's I don't hold with that, that's stupid. Mm-hmm. And so her big thing is anybody who wants a piece should have a piece.
Okay.
So it was a good trilogy. All right. Background on this poem, as we said, The Rose of Battle, conflicting sources, but according to Wikipedia, it was get off my notes, please. Originally published in 1892 in Yeats' second collection called The Countess Kathleen and Various Legends and Lyrics, which holds with a lot of the information that I was finding, that he wrote many poems and plays about Irish folklore, as Yeats himself was born in Dublin. He was an Irish poet. Other sources, like I said, stated that it was published in 1929 in a completely different collection. And like I said, that source just talks, it mentioned that it was about a rose blooming on the battlefield, but it highlighted lines that aren't even in the poem. So that one was a little weird. Mm. Then again, our question was, is it that it was published 2 different versions in 2 different collections?
Right. Like when Emily and I read The War of the Worlds, and we had completely different sections in some parts.
I'm wondering if it's possible. I'm trying to see, I want to see if I can find other versions.
Because didn't we say, too, that happened with The Lady of Shalott? It was republished later? And
things changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's definitely lots of themes here, and I'll be curious. I'm not going to mention what the themes listed in my research were, because I'll be curious to see what you pick out personally. But just some background on Mr. W.B. here. He was born June 13th, 1865, and died January 28th, 1939.
Okay.
Born in Dublin, died in France. He actually won the 1923 Nobel Prize in Literature. So he's a Nobel Prize winner. He served 2 terms as senator of the Irish Free State.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. I found that out about him. He wrote many of his early poems and plays are about Irish folklore, and then later ones got a lot more contemporary. So that's why I'm kind of leading to believe this one might have been more in the early time period and maybe leaning towards that 1892 lineup here. And then, it's funny enough, I found a line that said that his early poems are described as lushly pre-Raphaelite and self-consciously ornate, which definitely describes this poem.
Okay.
So
they're self-aware.
Self-aware, yeah. Rude critics were really mean about it, but I thought lushly pre-Raphaelite was a great descriptor.
You know, it's kind of interesting, this is now, I think, I know, it's the second author I've had who was also involved in government. Because when I was talking about Toronto with my dad, mm-hmm. and I said Horace Walpole, he knew who that was. Not from the book, but because of him being in Parliament.
All right. We got political authors on here.
So that's a thing that happens. But I guess it makes sense because they were educated. So they would have been familiar with literature.
Well-spoken, well-written.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well-read.
That makes a lot of sense. And then to bring it back around, like I said, the one commentary was that somebody mentioned they thought that this was about the Easter Uprising in 1916 in Ireland. But again, if it was published in 1892 originally, it definitely could not have been about an event that didn't happen for another, nearly 20 years.
Right.
So, we'll have to parse that out for ourselves, I suppose.
I don't know a whole lot about that uprising.
I don't either.
By a whole lot, I mean anything.
When I then was finding that it was published in 1892 and not 1929, I kind of dropped the Easter uprising thread and said I'll come back to that later, and then just didn't.
You could take a lot of different poems about war and apply them to anything, because war is kind of the same. I don't want to say it's the same experience every time, but it's never a better experience anytime.
No, and there's an honestly phenomenal song that literally sings, the lyrics go, oh my god, of course now as soon as I try to, think of it, it all goes out of my head. Mm-hmm. But it's the green fields of France, and it's again and again, the same as 1916, will we ever learn our lesson? Like, it's over and over again, we just keep doing the same thing.
Right.
It's basically the lyric. Mm-hmm. If I could remember the actual words, I would say them. Which I think comes back to that point of, did somebody read a updated copy in a newer collection and then go, oh, this must be about this Irish uprising that he would have experienced in 1916. Maybe, but probably not. All right, do you want to read it or do you want me to read it?
You can read it, since you have brought this for us.
All right. The Rose of Battle. Rose of all roses, rose of all the world, the tall thought-woven sails that flap unfurled, above the tide of hours, trouble the air, and God's bell buoyed to be the water's care. While hushed from fear or loud with hope, a band, with blown, spray-dabbled hair, gather at hand. Turn if you may from battles never done, I call as they go by me, one by one. Danger no refuge holds, and war no peace, for him who hears love sing and never cease. Beside her clean-swept hearth, her quiet shade, but gather all for whom no love hath made. A woven silence, or but came to cast a song into the air, and singing past, to smile on the pale dawn and gather you, who have sought more than is in rain or dew, or in the sun and moon, or on the earth, or sighs amid the wandering starry mirth, or comes in laughter from the sea's sad lips, and wage God's battles in long grey ships. The sad, the lonely, the insatiable, to these old night shall all her mystery tell. God's bell has claimed them by the little cry of their sad hearts that may not live or die. Rose of all roses, rose of all the world, you too have come where the dim tides are hurled upon the wharves of sorrow, and heard ring the bell that calls us on, the sweet far thing. Beauty grown sad with its eternity made you of us and of the dim grey sea. Our long ships loose thought-woven sails and wait, for God has bid them share an equal fate. And when at last, defeated in his wars, they have gone down under the same white stars, we shall no longer hear the little cry of our sad hearts that may not live or die.
Wow.
So it's kind of an interesting poem. I've only ever heard the part that begins with the second Rose of all roses, because that's the part
in the book.
That's the part that she uses in the book. But it's interesting because it's almost like the first half and that last section. The last section is almost a less flowery version of the first part.
So I'm also thinking too, obviously this is about sea battle.
Yeah.
So did the Easter uprising take place at sea?
Let's check it out. I know the one
otherwise
thing...
I'm not
seeing the connection.
Not seeing a connection, yeah.
Oh, see, now this is... No, there's actually there's a poem called Easter 1916.
Interesting.
So literally, let's just take that out. Take out the Yeats part here. Okay, so the Easter Uprising, also known as the Easter Rebellion, was an armed insurrection in Ireland during Easter week in April 1916. According to the photographs, definitely was not on water. It looks like they barricaded buildings in town somewhere. What happened? On Monday, Easter Monday, 1916, Irish nationalists launched an armed revolt against British rule in Ireland. Quickly suppressed by the British Army, the rising was a seminal moment in modern Irish history, helping pave the way to the nation's independence in 1922.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say at least that version of it was definitely not about this event.
I would say no.
Because your version of it invokes a lot of seafaring imagery in it. I would also could see that actually being written in 1892.
Yeah.
Because this is the era of the huge navies and like ironclad ships and whaling and stuff like that. So there's a romanticism to being at sea.
And there's also, again, with the Irish folklore of sending your man off to sea and then waiting with bated breath for him to come home and worrying about whether he's going to return from the sea or not. There's a lot of that desperation in there.
But it's not like glorified, but it's very romanticized.
Yeah. So we have gather all for whom no love hath made a woven silence or but came to cast a song into the air and singing past. It's like all of this really beautiful romantic language, but like you said, not making it out to be this glorious thing because they have gone down under the same white stars and we shall no longer hear the little cry
it's
of our
almost
sad
like
hearts.
subverting that. He's using that language and he's describing it as like, well, you're waving them off as the ships go by, right? And there's always, when ships leave the harbor, you always see like, you know, the sailors all waving and everyone's on the pier waving, and it's a grand event.
Like the Titanic, the opening scene in Titanic where everyone is like waving and I get teary.
Yeah.
Pageantry,
yeah, especially in the Navy, there's a lot of formality and tradition that goes along with it too. But here he's telling us that it's not like this kind of grand triumphant event because they're basically all going to die. They're sailing off to their doom.
I definitely agree with you on that. And there was mention of that in some of the research of the themes. And what was interesting is that he was, in the themes research, it was essentially him begging them, if you've ever known the love of a woman, don't go off to war because you're going to die. Like, come back, ignore the call to war, and instead stay for the love of the woman. And I can see a lot of that, but it was also, again, the other themes research was showing, like, oh, it's about a rose blooming on the battlefield, and this juxtaposition between the fleeting beauty of the rose on the battlefield surrounded by the blood and death and mud. And again, it was referencing lines that I'm like, but where is the blood on the where is the rose on the battlefield imagery in here? Because I could not find it.
There is none. There's no land battle imagery in here at all. I'm trying to figure out the rose itself because we've been presented with the image of sea battle.
Yeah.
And roses don't grow in the ocean.
No. Unless the rose is the woman. Comparing her to being like the rose of all roses, okay. Rose of all the world, the most beautiful.
It's the land left behind.
The land, the woman, exactly. Ireland being the rose, or the woman being left behind, being like the one of the world. Yes, that's like one of the themes or the things that I could see that, and I'm like, that's probably where we're going with this because like. I'm like the rose blooming in the battlefield in the mud.
There's a lot of symbolism that goes with roses themselves. One of them being love.
There's also the like fleeting beauty of a rose. The nature of roses being transient in the, they're going to bloom and die. Can I go find this source again from earlier? Because, here we go. Here we go. Like this one. It is about the Easter Uprising. And I'm like, I don't call this a story guide or a study guide. Love and battle ring throughout this collection. His wife his beloved was a brilliant nationalist.
Well, because you sent that to me yesterday, and I kind of looked it up a little bit just to see like what it was, and there were other poems that were like the rose of.
Yeah, so that's why I'm wondering if they're mentioning a different one entirely. This one, here we go. Sea spray spotted figures gather on a beach to go to battle. The poet addresses them, saying that the war does not carry peace, but if they have felt of the love of a woman, they should go home. The rose has seen many men go to battle for her, but none return. That the rose representing Ireland, ranking her first in importance. So this was one that I actually could kind of get, but again, there was like, where did this whole 1916 uprising come from? The inevitable defeat that she picked up.
It was attributed because it is an uprising for Irish freedom. So, like, you're going to fight for Ireland. And that is kind of a theme in both.
Here it was. Okay. I don't know if I wanted to call out this source. No, where was it? There was one that was, like, legitimately, I was confused as to, like, where did you guys get this concept from?
The mystery interpretation here.
Got it. Here we go. The Rose of Battle, a literary masterpiece. Okay, so, written in 1929, published in his collection. So this is one where it says it was published in his collection, The Winding Stair and Other Poems, in 1929. On the surface, The Rose of Battle appears to be a simple poem about a flower growing in a battlefield. However, upon closer examination, it becomes clear the poem has a deeper meaning. It represents hope, beauty, and resilience, a symbol of life and growth in the midst of death and destruction. The first stanza sets the tone for the rest of the work. He writes, "The rose of battle is a thing that is born today and yet has lived in other springs and will not pass away."
Can we just look up those lines and see actually where that's coming from?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't even sound like Yeats' writing based on what you just read.
Right, yeah.
Like, that sounds like some...
Like, his later writings apparently might have been less flowery. The rose of battle is a thing that is born today and yet has lived in other springs and will not pass away.
That's so simple.
Right? Then the second stanza deepens this theme. "The rose of battle is a flower that springs among the blood, and yet it has a beauty's dower, and none shall call it mud." Like, it's a different poem! Right? Like, I'm not going crazy. And at the top, when you look here, they have the same poem that I've been reading. So, like, they're referencing an entirely different poem than the one they even have posted.
Now, see, even when I look up those lines, what I'm getting is the one that you read with the ships and the sails.
So, like, I don't understand. Like, what are you reading, Broseph? My brother, I don't know. Like, this is where I was wondering, like, am I going insane? Is there another version of it? Because then whenever you look up the Rose of Battle, the only version I've ever been able to find in, like, the 50 different searches I've been doing was the one that we just read.
Yeah, I think whoever wrote that might have just made it up.
I mean, I guess so, because then here's a whole nother third stanza. The rose of battle is a dream that is dreamed amid the strife, and yet it has a living gleam, and none shall call it life. Like you said, compared to the tall thought-woven sails that flap unfurled, above the tide of hours trouble the air, and God's bell buoyed to be the water's care, while hushed from fear or loud with hope a band.
That's very different.
Yeah, that sounds like this sounds like master, lyricist compared to me writing middle school stuff.
I didn't want to say it sounds like a kid wrote it, but it sounds like a kid wrote it.
Yeah, I mean...
That's very strange.
Right. 4 stanzas with 4 lines, rhyme scheme AB, meter, iambic, pentameter. I'm like, okay.
Where did they get that from?
And it's not even AB, it's AA, BB, CC. It's like rhyming couplets. They're literally rhyming couplets. I could say... Rose of... Yeah, I don't think it's iambic pentameter either, because that's a combination of stressed and unstressed syllables. Like, Shakespeare is iambic pentameter.
Right.
This is an iambic pentameter. Okay, I don't know what this person read, but it definitely was not the Rose of Battle. Or whatever the second person read also was not the Rose of Battle. So, I think they were handed a completely different poem, and then... So we're just gonna put this... Or like I said, I thought I was going insane. We're just gonna put that source away, because it's wrong.
Yeah. Well, you know what's the best source for us to use? Our own thinking brains.
Our thinking brains, yes. To go back to... Let me get back to the actual... I downloaded the picture. Here we go.
So we had going off to sea, never to return.
Yep.
And how everything to do with the ocean is romanticized.
Yes.
Leaving behind the love of either a spouse or...
Your love for your country.
Yeah, so it's either like a literal person or the idea of your country.
So I like this thing I'm noting here a lot, where he keeps mentioning God, and God's bell buoyed to be the water's care. Then, I just had it down here, and wage God's battles in the long gray ships, but then God has bid them share an equal fate. So it's almost like this combination of like a caring and yet an uncaring God, where you've got God's bell buoyed to be the water's care, and yet at the end... Oh, and God's bell has claimed them by the little cry, but then God has bid them share an equal fate, that we're all going to go down together. Doesn't matter who you were fighting for, doesn't matter whether you were fighting for God or not, you're all going down.
I was thinking, like, that's telling us, like, death being the great equalizer.
Ooh, yeah. Death doesn't care who you are.
Yeah. Dead is dead, no matter who you went off to fight for.
Yeah, that's chilling and sad.
Of course, we're not necessarily given a specific battle to go along with this. It could be any naval battle. Mm-hmm. But I don't think any of them would have been considered holy wars, necessarily, since this isn't, presumably not crusading.
No, I mean, especially not if we're talking 1892. Like, so, we are still probably talking...
It's like I think it's almost like a false belief that society has sometimes that what they're doing is the will of God. Mm-hmm. People falsely attribute these things to justify their violence.
I 100% agree with that, and we can still see that to this day in so many of the ways that people treat each other, where it's like, not to get kind of depressing for the minute here, but... If we think about how many atrocities have been committed in the name of God. To bring it back around, the imagery here, not even just like, if we take out the sea battles and everything, just the imagery, a woven silence, a song into the air, to smile on the pale dawn, who have sought, or and gather you who have sought more than is in rain or dew, or in the sun and moon, or on the earth, or sighs amid the wandering starry mirth. Just the language he uses here is really delightful. And people don't talk like this anymore, or even write like this anymore.
No, it's really funny to say. Have you ever seen, there's on Instagram, there's a couple, and they have, like, avoiding arguments by talking to each other like Victorians.
Like Victorians, yes. The coffers cannot hold to this standard anymore. Yes, I saw that. It was really funny.
It's like when you use language that's so cordial, like, how can you be mad?
No, you can't. You just can't. Oh, and yes, you must limit it to a certain number of parcels per moon's turn or something. It was so funny. But it just kind of...
Yeah. Well, because it's like you also have this really beautiful language, but it's also very sad.
Yeah. And again, I think that's why this poem, to this day, I mean, I literally have it memorized. Rose of all roses, rose of all the world, you two have come to where the dim tides are hurled upon the wharves of sorrow and heard ring. However many years after this book came out, somewhere in the late 2000s, that's how much it stuck with me, that to this day, I literally still think about this poem sometimes. And it might have only been the end section. I didn't really ever know that there was so much more to it until I started thinking about it, because we were talking about it. It has always just had this serious sense of melancholy.
Oh, yeah.
There's just this, like you said, the sadness to it. And, like, what, the sweet far thing, the bell that calls us on, the sweet far thing, like, what, that could be, I don't know, there's a depth there.
The sweet far thing. What's the full line? The bell that calls us on. Now, that's interesting, because it was also talking about, like, God's bell.
Mm-hmm.
The bell that calls. So it's, almost like an impossible goal.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that thing that keeps driving you forward.
But it's never actually attainable.
But the hope that carries you, because if you let go of that hope, you just give up and you die. Yeah. See? I'm like, now I'm getting sad again. Now I'm wondering, like, Libba Bray might have really actually dug into this, because there's that same concept, that hope. Because she's Lady Hope. Like, that's her nickname throughout the book. Everybody, the spirits call her Lady Hope, because, like, the magic was dying, and she is, like, the new generation that's going to bring it back to life. But also, they all have nicknames. There's the song, I forget. One of them is the song, one of them is the beauty, one of them is the strength, and she's the hope. And they all four have different roles to play throughout the trilogy, and this, that, and the other thing. Hope can't die. And throughout the entire series, there's all these different times where it's like, either you're going to give up, or, you know, you realize that the melancholy, and she's of course is like a modern girl living in a Victorian world and wants to wear pants and, you know, doesn't want to wear corsets, you know, it's a whole thing. But no matter what, her kind of big character arc is realizing that she can't let the hope die.
You know, that would make sense with the last couple lines too, where we shall no longer hear the little cry. Cry of our sad hearts. Our hearts are crying for hope. And that is what may not live nor die. They're going to this battle, like the ultimate goal is peace, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of saying that, like, that's not really attainable as long as people keep going to war.
Which, okay, now that that brings me back again to the grain fields of France, where I remember the story is that he's sitting on a grave, and it's, you know, do you mind if I rest here, young Willie McGee? Do you know that it all happened again?
Because, I mean, just the nature of hope, right?
Yeah.
It's always, like, a thing that's kind of
amorphous, and
it's, like, detached from you. Like, you have hope is because you desire something that you don't currently have.
Yeah.
Your hope for peace, or your hope for a better future, but it's always something that's ahead of you.
It's not something like you've achieved. Like, you stopped because you've achieved it. Like, it always has to be at the end, and you keep having to go forward. That's where that hope comes in, and, like, the hope for peace, I think, is part of this, because... Okay, so I've got the lyrics here, and it's like one of the very last, it's actually the last verse, and it's, young Willie McBride, I can't help wonder why, do those who lie here know why did they die? And did they believe when they answered the call, did they really believe that this war would end wars? Well, the sorrow, the suffering, the glory, the pain, the killing and dying were all done in vain, and young Willie McBride, it all happened again and again and again and again and again. Mm-hmm. And so... that it's like you said, this human, we just keep going to war, but the hope for peace, I think, allows us to stop the war until we get too stupid to realize that we did it again.
Right.
You know, so you're at the one end of the rainbow in the middle of the war, and you see the hope for peace on the other side, and you know, trek, and you get there for a little while, and then you know, it just keeps moving forward away from you.
The goalposts are constantly moving, because even if the war ends, like, that doesn't solve all problems.
No. And as our society gets more and more advanced and, you know, bigger, we're gonna just have all different new problems to go to war over. Yeah.
Were there any other themes in particular that you... Because I know you said you wanted to see how many I picked up on.
So I had
I think I did pretty good.
Yeah, because it was mostly, literally, I had written down themes of, is it a love poem? Is it a battle/a war poem? Is it about the Easter Uprising? I think we nailed all of the themes that I literally jotted down as a question mark, question mark, question mark.
At least the major ones.
The major ones, yeah. And we got to talk about all the flowery, fancy, pre-Raphaelite, self-consciously ornate language. Because, like I said, I think that was a very apt description of some of this.
Because the language is so wordy, And it also switches perspective a few times in the poem.
Yeah.
You have to really kind of like wade through it to figure out what it's actually about.
I think I have read through this about 6 or 7 times since I pulled it out last night. But this is one of those ones where I almost want to sit down with like the No Fear Shakespeare sort of and just translate it line by line. Because I understand all of these words. But when you swing them all together like this, I start to lose the thread. And I am like ostensibly a well-read person who can speak very formally, and I write very flowery a lot of the time. And even I'm like sitting here going, ostensibly I get this line, but I need to like sit here and chew on it for about 10 minutes before I can understand what he's saying.
Well, that's the thing about poetry, right, is because it's an emotional expression, it doesn't actually have to be logical. Like, your words don't actually have to be in a logical kind of order, and it can be abstract.
You're just trying to evoke from others.
Yeah.
Hence art. If you evoke emotion, it is art.
That's right.
Whether it's good or bad emotion. Which I suppose is why modern art is so infuriating sometimes.
Yeah.
It evoked emotion.
I would say that it has to be intentional.
Yeah, modern art drives me insane sometimes. I was very proud of my lonely waffle on hallway floor, though. I took a picture at my job of a lost breakfast waffle about 3 inches across that was just sitting on the freshly waxed floor. And honestly, I entitled it Lonely Waffle on Hallway Floor.
Do you still have that?
I have it in here somewhere. Lonely Waffle Hallway Floor. Blown away by my very beautiful modern art piece. There she blows.
Incredible.
Tile,
wax, flour, water,
sugar, egg. Might have been milk, I don't know. It just struck me as a very melancholy moment. Hi.
You know, I think it says a lot about the nature of just being a child in school.
Yeah. So, what a way to end this podcastle, but with a lonely waffle on a hallway floor.
And the cat came back.
And the cat, yeah. Oh! And threw things to the floor. Yes, hi. Are you? Ow, 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 claws! Oh, God! That hurt. All right, my pain is your humor. That's all I've got for today.
All right, we'll wrap it up. Grace your ears some other time with something else.
Do we normally? Is this when you drop where we can find us at everything?
No, because no.
Okay. I've only done one podcast ever before, and I don't know if it ever went live.
I mean, I guess that's what you're supposed to do. It's like, oh, well, you can... I mean, if they're already listening, though, they've already got a preferred platform.
That's true.
If you've made it this far, you're listening on something, presumably. But yeah, no, it is available on a bunch of different platforms now.
Including the Tube of You, the 5-spot, it.
Yeah, Haunted Hearts Society podcast is available on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio?
Yeah.
Wow. We're moving up in the world.
Don't ask me how Colleen managed all of those, but she did.
Yo, plug your pluggables. That's what I'm like, there's a word for this. This is where you tell your guests to plug their pluggables. That was what it was.
Oh, okay. Do you have any personal social medias you'd like to shout out?
Well, I can be found on pretty much all social media platforms at IT_S time for tea, all spelled out. It's time for tea. With an underscore instead of an apostrophe.
You know what my brain just did?
What?
It's time to duel.
Duel! We used to have, what was it, the battle?
It's the same amount of syllables.
Really?
It's time for tea. It's time to duel.
Yes, it is. I might have to. Oh my God, this cat. What was the name of the arm? It was like the arm shark.
Dual disc.
The dual disc. We had a whole dual disc.
Did you see? I got a new box of Yu-Gi-Oh cards.
Yeah. I did not see the new Yu-Gi-Oh cards. My younger sibling. Oh yeah, there they are. My younger sibling had a dual disc, and we used to fight bitterly over who got to use the dual disc.
My cousin had one, and it didn't actually do anything. You couldn't actually duel with it.
No, but it was fun to wear.
How are you going to know what cards are on your opponent's field when they're on their arm?
I don't know, but it was really cool.
It was pretty useless for dueling.
But it was fun. It looked cool. You got to pretend like you were Seto Kaiba.
Or you looked like a massive nerd.
I mean, in the privacy of our own homes, we're all massive nerds. So yeah, I guess stay haunted. How do you end the podcast?
We just say bye.
All right, well, bye. Bye from Kat.
Goodbye.